The Becoming Unsilenced podcast is about awakening to the greatest potential you always were. Listen to teachings, interviews, and inspiring stories of others who have challenged the accepted, expanded possibility, and merged modern day life with ancient wisdom to discover their greatest potential. When you become fearless, you become limitless. Now be inspired by today's episode. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about the 5 F's of emotional trauma. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and faint. Now, in our last episode, we talked about the 7 levels of growth and development that we go through as human beings, and how the first stages of that is healing and complete healing of our past, resolving all the issues of our past. And as much as it'd be great to say that that's a one-time event, we resolve things in layers. And it's almost, we're going to go back to the Eiffel Tower scenario, because resolving things from your past is like strengthening this really solid base of your Eiffel Tower. But if you can imagine, as the Eiffel Tower gets taller and taller and taller and more visible, it also gets narrower because it no longer needs this stuff that it had around it at the bottom. It no longer needs that as it continues to grow at the top in its visibility. And that's the same for us in life, because to grow to the greatest potential that you have inside of you, it requires you to let go of the baggage in the past that you've been dragging around so long. Now, I speak from one who has a lot of experience in letting go of the baggage of the past. And it'd be great if we were able to just drop all of those bags at once and let them go. But it's more happens like the peeling of a layer of an onion, where we begin to be aware of certain things that aren't working for us in life anymore. And then in those first 3 stages, we really begin digging deep and understanding what is causing those wounds, the things that appear. And they often appear in these 5 F's, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and faint syndromes. It's how you become aware that something else is controlling the show and not the authentic you inside of you. And when I talk about the authentic you inside of you, I'm talking about this heart-centered space, the space where you connect with the innermost essence of your being. And we all have moments when we're in that connected space. And what our goal is to release the things that are controlling us so that we can stay in that connected space all the time, because that's when we allow this greatness to flow through us, and where we can truly begin to live an unsilenced life. So let's talk about how those 5 F's show up in life. Let's talk first about the fight syndrome. And as we talk about this, I want you to kind of do a little mental inventory on which one of these things do you see for yourself? Which one of these things might you see in the people around you? It's really insightful when we begin to understand that even the people around us, their behavior is driven from the things that are unresolved inside of them, not about you. Someone else's behavior is never about you, but yet it's very, very easy to internalize, and especially when someone else wants to deflect and not take responsibility for that, and they want to shift that blame to you, it's very easy to take on the blame for things that aren't ours. So in the fight syndrome, it's all about temper and angry outbursts, silence or violence in language where we're either giving someone the cold shoulder or we're arguing and defending. It's all about dominating and controlling, demanding perfectionism of others. Things have to be exactly this way. Sometimes you may have heard the phrase my way or the highway. It can also show up in impulsive decisions where I was going in one direction and all of a sudden, whoop, turn the car and now I'm going in a complete opposite direction as fast as I can. That shows up in relationships, right? When we get to that point where we are fearful of the next step of a relationship, it can be easy to make those impulsive decisions. And then it also becomes a flight syndrome. So changing your mind without warning, being assertive or bullying, and then constant judgment or criticism of others. Now, I was raised in an environment, it was a very conservative, extreme religious environment where everything that I heard, said, or did was always a criticism of someone else. It was everything that fits in this fight category. So that organization demanded extreme perfection of the members. So you had to look a certain way, you had to talk a certain way, your hair had to be a certain way, your clothing had to be a certain way. You had to live according to these very, very extreme, rigid guidelines. And if you broke outside of that, that was there was there was punishment, there was trauma, there was consequences. And so as a child, I grew up in this extreme hypercritical environment, like having your life under a magnifying glass almost 24/7. And put me into this hyper, always on guard state of hyper alertness, hyper vigilance of what was happening for me. That's actually the parasympathetic nervous system, or the vagus nerve, actually kicking into the fight mode, and it's there to protect you. So when I was a child, I needed this kind of fight sensation of hypervigilance to be paying attention, to protect myself and to protect, my siblings and my family from this extreme judgment, criticism that would come, and consequences if we didn't measure up to these standards. So that is how that kind of showed up for me as a child, but it's carried through until I began to recognize that some of my own behavior was driven by this extreme need to protect myself, which was no longer the case at age 15. My family left that church, and in the separation of that, we just totally shifted our life in a new direction. But what stayed with me was, until I focused on healing, that was the trauma from those events. And that trauma acts as a lid on your potential. So even as a young person, I had this great inner sense inside of me that, I'm here for something. I'm here for something significant. I'm here for some reason. And I had this inner sense of knowing that inside of me, but I couldn't understand what that was. I had no idea what it was. And what happened over the years is this trauma put a lid on that potential. And as long as I wasn't willing to look into, kind of like open the lid of that jar and look in, then that trauma kept running the show, keeping me for a majority of my life in those first two stages of the personal development growth, which is survival, and then survival and stability, where I had, kind of this stable life, but it always went always, my relationships were up and down, my finances were up and down, my emotions were up and down. I kind of always felt like I was maybe circling the black hole sometimes. Um, and I needed to understand and come to this point of understanding that it was actually that trauma keeping me limited. So we've talked about the fight symptoms. Let's talk about the flight symptom. Yeah, how does flight show up in your life? Feelings of panic and anxiety, workaholism, obsessive compulsive, always on the go, too busy to ever stop and pay attention, over worrying, extreme independence, perfectionist and overachiever, hyperactive, and overly analytical. Now, once again, the flight symptoms, they show up in many different ways. And as we peel that layer of our onion and heal one layer inside of us, then it exposes a new layer, and then we can heal that layer. And the good news is there is a core to that healing. We do kind of eventually work to that core, and we begin to recognize the repeating patterns that show up, and then we develop tools to work with them. So in the flight, I'm going to just share with you the ones that have really been powerful for me in realizing, and that is workaholism, always on the go, kind of tied to workaholism, over worrying, extreme independence, overachiever, and over analytical. So it's it's actually even been only recently, as I continue to peel back these layers, that I've realized that this tendency of workaholism really comes from a a flight response of insecurity. And for me, it's insecurity around finances, insecurity around knowing what's ahead of me. And of course, right now, I'm recording this when we're right in the height of our COVID pandemic, where we have a lot of insecurity, and this time is is actually triggering a lot of things for people that have lain dormant for a long time. And that is what happens, is as we grow and as the circumstances around us ask us to step up to new levels, then these things come up for us to see them and be resolved. So understanding that throughout my whole life, I went through these cycles of intense working, like massive amounts of efforts, which is reinforced in our culture of, strong work ethic and hustle and bustle. And you know, you've got to fight through to get things done. But that workaholism would always lead me to this space of almost burnout, where either physically or mentally or emotionally, I would just like check out, which that is more of a faint response. So we're kind of mixing all of these together a little bit, but the flight in there in that workaholism was me always running as fast as I could to get away from this level of insecurity. And what I have acknowledged and come to see is that my security lies in a much deeper place than um, than my work generates. So my security of who I am and my worthiness of existence is not tied to how much I do. I already am that. And that's been a process of me learning that as I heal things and grow to these next levels. Worrying was also one of mine on here. It's one that I'm still deal with some actively, not near as much as I used to, but I used to be consumed about the what ifs. And that's a way of like running to the future to try to figure things out. It kind of partners with the over analytical, because you're worrying about what might happen, and then you're analyzing all these different scenarios. And while there is a healthy way of making decisions that looks and evaluates at choices on what the consequences might be, over analyzing in from a fear-based place is not productive. And my overachieving was always this run to be seen, be recognized. It was the only way when I was growing up that I could differentiate myself and that I could get a little bit of recognition. I was a straight A performer all through high school and college. Funny, the only B I ever got was in the badminton in college. and um, and as I see that now, as I had set these super high standards for myself, that it was just a crisis if I didn't hit them. But it was the way that I could get recognition from the people around me. And extreme independence. I want to touch on this one because so many women feel like, oh, it's such a wow, I'm doing this all by myself. I don't need anyone else's help, and I don't have to have help, and I'm not going to ask for help. And that is actually a trauma response that keeps you stuck. So there's a very healthy place of being um, independent of your own inner spirit, but allowing people to support you in a way that overall lifts you up and feeds you instead of drains you. Okay, so we're going to move on to the freeze syndrome. Freeze is depression, disassociation, brain fog, your mind goes blank, your voice freezes. Detached, constantly questioning yourself, indecision, this like, I can't make a decision, I'm just kind of frozen, hibernation, and just feeling lifeless and emotionally drained, like I just can't move forward, I'm just drained. And these things keep us in a state of freeze. It really is when all of these emotions and things from the past are just lodged in us like icebergs. And they show up in a way that, again, limits us. It acts as a lid on us and on our true potential and creativity and greatness, because it drags us down and keeps us at this level that we can't where we're just in this frozen space. I saw myself very clearly as I began to heal from my own traumatic experiences. I began to see places and times where I would know exactly what I wanted to say, but literally the words would not, it was literally like my vocal cords were paralyzed. Like I could not even force sound out of my throat to share that thought. Now, when that happens, whether that's at work or in relationships, it usually comes from, again, as a protection mechanism, because it's the fear of rejection or a fear of having to validate your viewpoint. And you're constantly questioning yourself, so it's uncomfortable to validate your viewpoint. So if you have experienced these things, just know that it's not you. It's the way that your body is protecting you and responding and trying to keep you safe from situations that you've experienced in the past. And then the fawn syndrome. Fawn is this people pleasing, this extreme over-helping, and what sometimes is referred to as codependency. But it's where people have a hard time standing up for themselves and saying no. They lack clear, firm boundaries. They might bite their tongue in deference to another person's opinions and desires. This is a little similar to the voice freezing, but it's different in the fact that you have the physical ability to speak up, you just make a choice not to. It's the walking on eggshells syndrome, avoiding conflict to to get get along to go along. That's one of those things that we've heard at times. And taking on others' interests instead of your own. So you become this person that instead of showing up as who you are, you kind of morph into the situations around you. So you kind of meld in and blend in with wherever you're at. You could become a chameleon. And if you're in this relationship, then you kind of blend in and almost take on the interests and the desires and likes of that person instead of really standing in your own. Now, you can only do that for so long before you begin to feel resentful, you begin to feel angry, and then, of course, problems come along. Over helping and over giving at the expense of yourself, which also says that if you're over giving to someone, if you're enabling and doing for them what they are capable of doing for themselves, that is a space where you're actually not honoring their own ability to do things for themselves. You're almost putting yourself in a parent role of saying, you don't know good enough how to do this, so I have to step in and do it for you. Over helping and over giving drains us emotionally, physical, and it leaves us exhausted. And there's different levels of this again. So where you might have worked through this on one level in your personal life, now it might be showing up in your business where you're over giving in some area in your business and it's draining you. And then let's take a look at the faint response. Have you seen the fainting goats that when they feel like there is something threatening them, they literally just tip over and look like they just died almost. They faint. And it's their way of checking out and protecting them. And so we can experience this faint mode in many different ways. For some people, it actually shows up as a desire to sleep. So anytime a difficult circumstance comes up, they just want to fall asleep instead of dealing with it. And sometimes that pull to fall asleep is so strong that they can't even keep themselves awake. So that's one way that that faint shows up. Faint can be where we've pushed ourselves so hard in all of these other areas that we just literally our body says it's enough. I'm just checking out of this for a moment. And health problems that develop, all sorts of things that happen when we're not willing to look at things head on. Okay, so if you've listened to these things today and you've identified with some of them and you say, yeah, I kind of recognize that for myself, then what do you do about it? So the first really key thing is having awareness that it's happened. And I go through these kind of lists of things because it is a way to give you kind of a wake-up call to say, an awareness check-in to say, okay, is this something you're experiencing? And so begin to have awareness. And in any area where you feel like there's conflict or like you're at odds with your life, take that one area and see what of these symptoms is showing up. Because that issue that's happening for you, that is the symptom where the wound is the emotional wound that's much deeper for you is actually the true issue causing that. So, I look at my own tendency for workaholism and work, 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 work. I got to make this work. And I have been able to look at that in a totally new way now to say, okay, that is coming from an extreme insecurity. And it's also coming from a limiting belief that I have to do everything myself, back to this extreme independence that we talked about, and that I just that I am gonna just die. It's just going to be an absolute catastrophe if I don't accomplish something. Now that's the overachiever talking. So when I see those things show up now, I recognize them more clearly for what they are, where in the past I felt like I just was that. I just was doing the workaholism. I just was like, oh, I've got to schedule all these things, and I would go do that. And there was no awareness that there was a program running something. I just was I was in the video game. I was the character in the game doing, and there was no greater awareness that something was actually working in me at that time, or kind of controlling me in that direction. So awareness is the first key, and then you have to seek a new perspective. And this is the space where it's very helpful to have a coach, a counselor, someone to help you look at these things from a new perspective. Now, today, I hope to have provided you enough information that you can begin looking at some things from a new perspective for yourself. And if you need to dig deeper into that, then be willing to find the help to do that. But seeing things from a new perspective allow us to separate our true authentic being from the emotional trauma response. So now when I get that panic feeling of, oh, I got to get all of this done, I can say, okay, that is the trauma talking in me. And I can separate that now. And I can not just be in automatically respond mode. I can now separate that and say, okay, what is genuine that I need to get done now? And what is coming from a fear response? As you'll see and look at these, all of these are driven at the baseline of fear. And when we shift and we connect to our inner being, our true authentic space inside, that is always, always a space of love. It's always a space of light. It's always a space of growth, of greatness, and possibilities. Fear is all about judgment, criticism, failure, lack, not enough. And so it can become easy to identify the different states. And then our goal as we go through our 7 levels of growth and development is to begin to identify more with that heart-centered space inside of you and allowing it to run the show, allowing yourself to make decisions and live life from that space rather from this fear-based, panic-driven space. Okay, so if you've recognized yourself in there and you say, what's next? Well, I'd love to connect with you. I offer a range of membership program to small group to one-on-one transformational coaching that allows people to see these things, identify them, unhook them, and no longer have a lid on their potential. It allows you to blow the lid off your potential and begin living and allowing this genuine, authentic you to come out in a way that she's never been seen before, and allowing you to live at greater levels. It's what allows me to be here today doing this with you. It's taken me a significant journey of healing to be willing to be here, to be seen, to be heard, and to share my authentic voice. It's taken a lot of walking through some fear, walking through all of these things, not letting them anymore control my potential. And because this message needs to be heard, you've needed to hear this message today. So please check the notes below for ways to contact and connect with me. And the Align to Life membership is open right now. And the Align to Life membership is a 12-month series of lessons where you get to take one lesson at a time and work through these first 3 layers of personal development to go from survival to stability to connection to your own inner spirit and building your Eiffel Tower size strong foundation. So if you'd like more information about the Align to Life membership, check down below. It's a great way to get started with some learning and some growth, as well as you get a private Facebook community to support you on that journey, and you get to connect with me one time a month for group Q&A sessions. So you get to ask your questions in person or submit them to be answered. So have a fantastic day, and I'm proud to be part of your journey of becoming unsilenced and discovering the greatest potential that you always were. Have a great day. Thanks for being along for today's episode. Show us your love by sharing it with a friend and have an inspired day.